Purnamada Purnamidam Purnam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Brahman is infinite. This world is infinite. This world is only a projection of Brahman. And if this world is removed, Brahman still remains. Om, peace, peace, peace. So, good evening. So we're going to study the Isha Upanishad. And we cover the first about 3 or 4 verses. So in this changing world, everything is subject to change, yet everything is covered by the Lord. Practice renunciation and be strong in the consciousness of the self. Do not run after anyone's property. A man may wish to live for 100 years, performing his duties as prescribed by the scriptures. O man, if you do your duties in this way, then the results of whatever you do will not cling to you. There is no other way. There are those worlds known to be sunless and fit for demons. They are enveloped in darkness, such as what the blind, in other words, those devoid of self-knowledge, experience. Those people who have neglected the attainment of self-knowledge and have thus committed suicide, as it were, are doomed to enter those worlds after death. And then we come to the 4th verse. Tanejyatikam manaso javiyo maindeva apluvam purva marsha. Tararfaton yanajyati tishta tasminapo matarishvadadati. So Brahman is one without a second. It never moves, yet it goes faster than the mind. It is always ahead. The sense organs can never catch up with it. It is still, yet it defeats all in a race. By its power, the Lord who dwells in space upholds water and everything else in the phenomenal world. So Brahman, the self, is one without a second, complete in itself. It never moves, it is always still, always the same, yet it moves faster than the mind. It is the power that moves everything, and it makes the whole world go the way it does. It gives power to the Lord of the universe, Matarishva, the Lord who dwells in space, who is responsible for the operation of the principle cause and effect. There is no way of describing Brahman. It is beyond thought and speech. It is everywhere and in everything. It is formless, yet every form is its form. It is nameless, yet every name is its name. It is in fact unique. To emphasize this, the Upanishad makes contradictory statements. In one breath, the Upanishad says, Brahman is still, aneja. And in the next breath it says, it goes faster than the mind, manaso javiyo. What does it mean by this? The answer is, Brahman has 2 aspects. In one aspect it is one without attributes, nirguna. It is the absolute. It is pure consciousness, Shuddha Chaitanya. It is then existence absolute, knowledge absolute, bliss absolute. It is the cosmic self, Paramatma. In another aspect, Brahman is with attributes, Sanguna. It is then in its relative aspect. In this aspect, it may have a form, and it may also have many qualities, good and bad, small and big, and, and so on. There are an infinite variety of such qualities. These, it should be remembered, are mere attitudes, mere superimpositions, ajasa. They cannot affect Brahman. They are like masks children wear. The mind itself is inert. It can function only when the self, in other words the Atman, which is another name of Brahman, animates it. It cannot move faster than the self because it is the self that makes it move. And that self is everywhere. This also applies to all other organs called devas because they reveal of the body. And this applies to all the elements in nature. It is the power that works behind the cause as well as behind the effect. So take the case of air. When it is associated with the self, air is called the life force. But air by itself cannot sustain life. Air is also called matarishva because it moves about, swa, in space, matari. But it becomes active when it is associated with the cosmic self. It then becomes Hiranyagarbha, the first manifestation of Brahman as an individual, or Sutratma, the cosmic self of all. Like the thread passing through a garment, it is in this aspect that Brahman controls every phenomenon in nature. From fear of it, the fire burns. From fear of it, the sun shines. From fear of it, Indra and Vayu and death the fifth run. That's from the Katha Upanishad. So nothing can happen independent of Brahman, yet nothing affects it. The whole phenomenal world, including everything in it, is derived from Brahman, is sustained by it, and in the end dissolves in it. So this is in the first verse. We had the instruction to, that everything in the world is subject to change and cover everything with Brahman. And with this, don't desire the wealth of anyone else. And the idea in that first verse, which represents renunciation, he said, instead of focusing entirely on the appearances and reacting and interacting with the appearances, you focus on the underlying reality. And when you do that, instead of seeing everything in terms of what you like and don't like, what you think is good and what you think is bad, and instead of thinking in terms of what can I get for myself. I'm sitting here poor and somebody else has $1 million and I think, oh, I want to be like that. I want to have a nice big house like him. And like that, when you realize that it's the reality of things is that underlying reality, that underlying spiritual reality, and then you don't care about this appears and that appears. It all becomes kind of the same view. By human standards, we look at one person, we say this person is beautiful. We look at another person, say this person is ugly, this person's intelligent, this person's not. And like that, we're always kind of judging. And then, based on those judgments, we react. I like this or I don't like this. But when you look at the underlying reality, then you realize, oh, it's all the same. It's like a drama going on, and the same actor is playing all the roles. When you're aware of that one actor, of that one consciousness pervading everything, then you don't worry. You don't feel attracted or repelled by the various characters in the play because you know what the actual reality is. So that was the first verse. It said, cover everything with Brahman. Instead of looking at the world and saying good and bad and like and dislike, you put everything in Brahman. And this is actually a very powerful spiritual discipline. Usually we're in the world, we're interacting with people, going to work, we have family, we have other things, and we're always kind of in a struggle, trying to cope with the world, trying to cope with other people and interacting with them. And like I said, and we tend to then react, oh, this is a good experience, and I like this is a bad experience. And like that, we're always kind of going back and forth. But if you begin to think, and still that person appears to you, appears in front of you, and in one part of you says, okay, this person is here, they look a certain way, they're wearing certain clothes, they have a certain personality and all, and maybe I like them or I don't like them. But if you look at that person, you say, well, here's God come in this form. Now your whole attitude is gradually changing, and your whole experience of what the world is gradually begins to change, and you begin to realize that, oh, everything is the one Lord, everything is the one glorious, kind of wonderful Lord, and your whole experience becomes transformed, and you begin to actually live in the awareness of this divinity that's there in everything. And Swami Varadananda, he said that just as in human love, when we love someone, that even their faults appear as something very beautiful. And we said, like the mother with a child. The mother looks at the child, maybe the child misbehaves, maybe it behaves badly or something, but for the child, for the mother, that child is still beautiful. And so she sees everything the child does as in a very wonderful light. In the same way, he said, when you begin to see that it's God there in everybody, then the one kind of lovable Lord is there in everybody, then everybody appears in a very adorable light, even if they are, whether they're good or bad from the human standpoint. And so this is the gist of the first verse. Then the second verse, he talked about for the person who's not ready for that, to outgrow your kind of personal, kind of selfish quest for happiness, that he should perform action. He should perform good actions and worship, things like that. And through those good actions, he will have a very happy life and be very kind of blessed in his experience. And we mentioned that there were the four different goals in life: Artha, Kama, Dharma, and Moksha. Artha, that means wealth, means prosperity, means having at least enough so that you're comfortably kind of well off. Kama means desires. You have desires, and so you need to fulfill those desires to some extent. But the third one is Dharma, that when you pursue wealth and when you pursue your desires and all, you have to do it in a righteous way. Otherwise, the reactions that come back to you are negative rather than positive. And then, ultimately, though, the goal is to prepare you through life to attain moksha. And then the third verse is mentioned about how those people who don't seek spiritual development, who don't seek knowledge of God, they go to a dark place. And we mentioned how in Hinduism, they speak of heavens and hells, and they have like 7 levels of heaven and 7 levels of hell. But these are all temporary states. The soul, temporary experiences, like everything else in the universe, they're temporary experiences that the soul goes through. But they're not, the hells, they're not places of torture. Like in Christianity, so in the fundamentalist religions, they talk about, oh, you go to hell and you're thrown in a burning pit, and demons poke you with pitchforks, and all kinds of horrible things happen to you. It's not a place like that, but it's a place of darkness. And we mentioned how God is there, the infinite light of the whole universe. Those who are spiritually inclined, they're drawn towards that light. They seek to get closer to that light, and so they go to higher realms. But those beings who want to keep the light out, who want to hold on to their small ego, their small individuality, for them, they don't want that light. And so they kind of retreat into greater and greater darkness. And because they're living in spiritual darkness, they can then do very cruel, very bad things. In the world, there's the mythology of the demons. They're always doing kind of bad things, harming people. And there are people in the world who just actually enjoy hurting other people because they're so covered with ignorance, they have no sympathy with other people. And actually, that's because I've known people who are like social workers and all, and there are many people in society today, particularly, that are sociopaths. They just have no concept of the other person, of the happiness of the other person, how the other person feels. That they just don't understand that at all. And that's because the society has become so isolated, people have become so isolated from each other that they just don't have any sense of belonging. Now, one thing that happens as you approach the light, as you develop spiritually, is that you're becoming aware of the oneness of things. We saw that it's the one reality, the one consciousness, the one Brahman is there in everybody. The same self is there within each and every person. And your spiritual development is largely to how much you're aware of that. That as you move towards the Spirit, you find you're coming into harmony with this oneness of things. And you're also then discovering that all sense of loneliness, separation, alienation, things are gradually disappeared because you know, oh, I'm part of this. I'm part of this wonderful, vast universe. You know, when they talk of Brahman, they describe it as Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. Swami Varadananda used to always say, that by Ananda, or bliss, is really meant love. This one universal, divine love, pervading everything in this universe, and when you block that out, then you feel isolated, then you feel lonely, and then you feel like you're not a part of things, and all the things that we perceive going on in modern society. But when you gradually start to become aware of it, it's then you realize, oh, I'm safe and sound, everything is fine, I'm in good hands, and you then find yourself totally fulfilled. Most, probably emotionally, the most important thing in a person's life, psychologically and so on, is whether he feels loved or not. And if you don't feel loved, then all kinds of aberrations and things can develop. But when a person begins to feel love, then they feel secure. Oh, things are fine. I'm in good hands. And that is what happens as you begin to become aware of the of spiritual, this universal love that's there, and realizing that you're connected with that, that it's a part of you. And so, in this way, when they talk about heavens and hells and so forth, I would say, really, the soul is immortal. The soul never dies, and it goes through all kinds of experiences. Basically, it comes into this world, it lives its life, and has either a happy life or unhappy life, but based on it, then it goes to some celestial realm. Most of they go to a higher realm, and then they again come back to earth. And but underlying it all is the oneness of the divine. It is the one infinite reality, the infinite Brahman is there, and the ultimate goal is not to get to heaven. It's not to have happy experiences here and there, but to become aware, become reunited with God, and become aware of that and of the truth, of the reality of things. And then everything is fine. And then this is called moksha, or liberation. That now you've attained everything you've been seeking. In this world we're all seeking happiness, we're seeking to be loved, we're seeking to this or that, power or other things. But all those things that you've been seeking, you discover is right there within your own consciousness as the presence of God. And when you find it, then you realize, well, I don't need money, I don't need a car, I don't need these things, they just don't matter anymore. It's like the child who's got his favorite toy and will cry if the toy is taken away, but when he's an adult, you look at your old doll or something, okay, but you don't need it anymore. You just have outgrown it. And this is spiritually, what you're doing is growing. You're evolving, developing into kind of an adult rather than a child. And so as a person begins to become even a little bit spiritual, he kind of gets above the fray, starts to get above the fray, and then it's like the mother and the children are all fighting and squabbling around. She just looks at it. She doesn't get into the fight with the children, because she's an adult. She's more mature than that. And so some souls are very young souls who just are running around like crazy, and other souls are more developed. And they then become the teachers and helpers of other people. So then in the fourth verse then, it spoke about Brahman. It said, Brahman is one without a second. It never moves, yet it goes faster than the mind. It is always ahead. The sense organs can never catch up with it. It is still, yet it defeats all in a race. By his power, the Lord who dwells in space upholds water and everything else in the phenomenal world. So this is trying to describe Brahman, the ultimate reality, and it's doing it in contradictory terms, that it doesn't move, but yet it's faster than the mind and so forth. Now, in order to understand this, we used this example before, you have to have a different concept of creation than most people, at least most people in the West, what they have. Most people would tend to think that, well, God created me and He stuck me here on earth. And He created the universe, He stuck it there, and then He's sitting up on a big desk and running it all. But that type, when you look at the physical level, where you're thinking of everything in terms of different objects. There's a chair there, there's a table there, and so on. You're saying all these objects are separate, all of those are different. And then you think, well, when a painter, he creates a painting, but after that, that painting is something completely different than him. Now you say he can sell it, he can give it away, he can mail it to California, whatever he wants, that doesn't matter. There's no connection, because it's a completely separate thing. But then you have the idea of mental creation, which is, we use the example of the author who's writing a novel. He's creating a world within his mind, within his imagination. He's creating a world full of characters, full of all different characters, full of plot and action and events going on. And yet that world that he created is completely within his own mind. It's not something separate. It's something within his own consciousness. And when I was in high school, I had a friend, and he was very bright. He was like the brightest guy in our class. And he had this whole imaginary world he created, with kings and coups and all kinds of things going on. And I was just creating this world. It's like that you can create a world in your imagination, but that world is not separate from you. And we said that if the characters in that world, in that book, if they were conscious, and if they began to ask, who made me? Where is my creator? Who created me? They could examine every object in the world and they wouldn't find a single person there who made them. But yet all the time their creator is the consciousness of the writer, which is containing them. And this is what Brahman is. This whole universe is here, contained within the cosmic mind, the Hiranyagarbha. And this whole universe, it appears to be different objects, different people, things like that. But yet, it's all contained within the consciousness of God. And that is why in every religion they speak that God is omnipresent. Meaning He's right here, right where we're at. But when we look around outside, look at different objects and things, and asking, who made me, we don't find it. We can go to temples, we can go to mountains, we can go everywhere, and we don't find where God is. But yet, all the time, He's right here. And this is what the mystical life is mainly becoming aware of that which is already present right here. And the way you do that is by kind of reversing the direction of your attention. Normally our attention is going out to the world we see, to the objects and people and things that we see outside ourselves, and interacting with those. But in spiritual life in meditation, what you're trying to do is to reverse that, to begin to ask yourself, well, what's inside me? Who am I? Who is there that's experiencing these things? As you begin to explore in that direction, gradually you begin to uncover this presence of God within you. And that presence, as you begin to become aware of it, begin to experience it, it then solves all your problems. It then you realize, all my life I've been trying to find happiness, I've been trying to find love, or respect, or wisdom, knowledge, whatever I've been seeking, but it's right here within. If only I could just become aware of it. Now, as long as we are focused on this person, this particular individual, this particular body, this particular personality, we're not aware of it. We're aware of our ego. We're aware of, I'm this person, and I'm doing this, and we may consider ourselves, I'm a wonderful person, or I'm a bad person, or this, but all the time we're thinking, this is what I am. This is what reality is what I'm experiencing in my life. But when you begin to ask and search deeply, well, what's behind this? What's within this? You gradually start to become aware that there is something there. So as I said, when you start meditation, you're slowly withdrawing your attention from the outside world. You're starting to bring it inside. And at first, you'll start to get a little calmness, a little peace, a little stability. That things, you'll start to get your balance back. And but then slowly, eventually, as you go on with that, there comes times when you realize you've experienced something. You've touched some kind of higher reality that's there, and that it's something real. Up to that point, God is kind of a vague, abstract idea, but there can come points where you touch on something and you realize there's something else there that's beyond me, beyond my mind, beyond my individual life and personality. There's something kind of very wonderful there. And then you start kind of the mystical process or the spiritual process of becoming more and more aware of that thing. And then all the kind of the joys and successes and achievements that we've been looking for in the outside world, those all become small. Because what unfolds from within is kind of joys and pleasures and successes beyond anything you can imagine. As an ego, as an individual, we have certain abilities, certain talents, a certain amount of education, intelligence, and we can accomplish somewhat in the world. But yet all of that is just very kind of small and limited. When you discover there's this whole presence of God within you, and when you begin to discover that it can function through you, then your whole life becomes transformed, and instead of being kind of a small individual, you now become something, kind of transparency for the divine light to flow through, and there's no limit to what God can do. When you speak about Brahman, it's often this kind of an abstract idea. But when you think, well, what you're talking about is something out of which this entire universe has come, then you realize that if you can somehow touch it, somehow get in contact with it, even though you don't understand what it is, even though it can't be described, it still has to be something really wonderful. And so and all of that is actually within us all the time. This is what Swami Vivekananda said, that we mentioned before. He said we all exist as three different beings. Physical being with the body, we exist as a mental being with our intellect, our inspiration, our beauty and things, and only we exist as Atman, as spirit. In Atman, our self, the real self, is that very consciousness of Brahman, that infinite consciousness of Brahman, manifesting, experiencing through you, through this particular body. As the body, we're only aware of the appearance, we're only aware of kind of the experiences we get, and most of our time is spent complaining about the experiences. I didn't want that, I wanted that. But underlying that is divine, infinite consciousness, that's your real self, and when it's discovered, it's also discovered that that exact same self, that exact same consciousness is there within everybody else. And this gives you a totally transformed view, understanding of what the world is and what life is, and totally changes your experience. The same experience, the same life that you're leading now, the same job you're working in, the same activities, can be filled with wonder if you become conscious of the underlying divinity of it. And this is the whole spirituality is progressing into that divinity. Now the important thing about this message of Brahman and so forth is that it's something that's always there. It's something that's always available. It's not something that's way off in heaven and that you have to work really, really hard in order to achieve. It's just something that you have to kind of become aware of. And but it's always there. It can never be lost. We're all, as one of the scriptures say, we're all children of immortal bliss. That can never be taken away from us. We can forget it, and then we can get all tangled up in all kinds of really miserable experiences, but it can never be lost because it's the reality. The experiences, heavens and hells and everything else that we go through, those things are just like it's like watching a movie or a TV show. You watch a show and then all kinds of things happen, but you enjoy the show, even though people getting shot and blown up and things, even though you enjoy the show because I'm watching it. And it doesn't bother me at all, it doesn't affect me at all, it doesn't harm me at all, and it's entertaining. And so, but when you forget that, when you forget that you're actually the child of God and that Divine Mother is showing this universe to you, then you think everything that's going on is happening to me, and then you'll find sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're not happy, and so forth. So when they talk about Brahman and how it never moves and it goes faster than the mind, it means that it's here, it's everywhere, and so anywhere you go in this universe, Brahman is there. It's already there before you got there. And so, because it's the consciousness which contains everything, and the important thing is that it's also your consciousness. As a human being, that consciousness is connected with a particular body and a particular mind. But when you start to go deeper within, you discover that within, the thing within that's saying, this is me, is actually neither the body or mind, it's the Brahman consciousness. Actually, with various levels on the way, but eventually it's discovered to be that the thing which is got that says, this is me, is actually Brahman. Right? It thinks it's the body. This thinks it's this particular body, and when this particular body gets old, then it thinks, oh, I'm getting old. And when this body's in pain, it thinks, oh, I'm in pain. And like that, it's going through thinking is all these experiences that are coming, but always is actually Brahman. And we mentioned before, in these books come out now, near-death experiences and all, one of the most common is a person's on the operating table, and so forth, that comes. But then suddenly they find themselves up by the ceiling, and they can actually look down and see all the doctors. And I think this is a common experience that often they think a person's in a coma or totally unconscious, but then later on they find out that person heard everything they said about him. My father, he was an Indian, but he was very heavy, like 300 pounds or something, and he had a heart attack or something. He was unconscious, and the whole time he could hear the medics complaining about how heavy it was to carry, making comments about it. So anyway, like that, this is very common. Now, up to that point, the person's thought, I'm me, I exist, I'm alive because this body's here. But when that experience comes, then they look at the body and it's just an object. Like you look at the chair, it's just an object. But they're there. the thing within them is saying, this is me, I exist, I'm aware, that thing is there. But now it's no longer saying that body on the table is me, it now knows that it's something different. And like that, many different levels of consciousness are there as you move, but eventually, each of those levels, as you reach those levels, you eventually discover that the thing within, that's you, the thing within that's really you, is not the body, it's not a mind, it's something much vaster than that. And so this is what kind of we're trying to achieve. And it mentions there's two aspects there from Brahman. The Nirguna and the Saguna. So, Nirguna is Brahman as it is in its own nature. And Brahman is pure Brahman. Brahman is pure consciousness, Satchidananda. Then there's also Saguna Brahman, which is Brahman as this universe. That Brahman, in other words, you have transcendent Brahman, Brahman just in its own pure state, and you have the eminent Brahman, is the consciousness which pervades this universe and which ultimately which experiences through every single microbe and insect and plant and animal, everything is that one consciousness is there experiencing through them. And it also appears then in the universe as various gods and goddesses, various cosmic powers, things like that. And so this is Saguna Brahman. And the highest level of Saguna Brahman is Ishvara, the Lord, or God, or Hiranyagarbha, but as the creator. Now, normally in the West, when they speak of God, they speak of Him primarily as the creator. He's the one who created me, He's the one who created the universe, and so forth. But Brahman is actually not the creator. Brahman, as Brahman, he is just Brahman. When he creates the universe, then he's got Ishvara, the Lord, the Divine Mother, Shakti, however, but it's not actually what he is. He's not the creator of the universe. He's Brahman. But because Brahman is there, then the whole universe comes out. In other words, a particular person who says a teacher, and we say, so he's a teacher, and he goes, every day he goes to school and he teaches. But then at night he goes home and he just sits and watches TV or something. He's not teaching at all. He's just being himself at home. And so, like Brahman is God sitting at home being himself. When he's functioning, when he's creating, then you call him the creator, you call him the Ishvara, and so forth. And Sri Ramakrishna used to say, the two are the same. Brahman and Shakti, Brahman and the creative force, they're one and the same, just like the snake, when it's coiled up at rest, is the same snake as when it's moving. And so, like that, Brahman is both without attributes, pure spiritual consciousness, and like when a person goes into deep samadhi, they're not aware of the world at all. It doesn't exist for them. They're in Brahman. But when they come back from that experience and become aware of the world again, now they realize that Brahman they experienced inside deep meditation, that same Brahman is now appearing before them in the universe. And so there's two aspects, Nirguna and Saguna. So now we come to verse 5. Tadejati tabajayani tadure tatfantike tadantarasya sarvasya tadu sarvasya bhayate taha. That Brahman moves and it does not move. It is far off and it is also nearby. That Brahman is inside of this and is outside. So this mantra, it illustrates how futile it is to try to describe Brahman, which is without name and form, without anything distinctive that we can say about it. It is nothing, and yet it is everything. It is nothing because it is beyond thought and speech. It is everything because it is all-inclusive. So everything exists because of it, and it is the essence of everything. It is one and the same, but it appears diverse in terms of names and forms. These names and forms, however, are mere superimpositions. It is what it is, irrespective of everything. It is unchanging and unchangeable. And it is never conditioned by anything. It is both immanent and transcendent. So by itself, Brahman never moves. It never changes. It is always constant. Sometimes we see the moon moving behind some clouds, but actually the moon does not move. It is the clouds that are moving. In the same way, Brahman, the self, is always the same. It is never born and it never dies. Because it is associated with the body, it appears to be subject to birth and death. We wear a new coat, and when it gets old and torn, we throw it away. This is the relationship the coat has with the body. The same is the relationship the body has with the self. So Brahman, it moves and it does not move. It is far off and is also nearby. The Brahman is inside of this and is also its outside. So as we were saying, this is when you understand Brahman as the consciousness that contains everything, then you can kind of understand what they're saying here. Now, in when they speak of God as immanent, as becoming the universe, he doesn't actually become the universe. In other words, he's there, he's aware of the universe, he's experiencing all kinds of things through the universe, but he always remains what he is. And I think Shankaracharya, he used the example that if you have different pots of water, some of the pots are small, some are large, like that, all kinds of different pots of water there, and in each pot of water, the sun is reflected. If it's a small pot, it's a small reflection. If it's a big pot, then it's a bigger reflection. But none of those pots, none of those reflections have any effect at all on the sun itself. The sun is what it is, it's always shining, it's always completely what it is, but yet it's experienced. And so like that, each of us is like a pot, some of us little pots, some big pots, but we're all kind of reflecting that divine presence, that divine light, but yet the light itself is always what it is. When in ignorance we identify with the pot and with the reflection, and then we think, oh, this is what I am. But in truth, we're always that Brahman, that light. And this, when we talk about spiritual practices and all, this is we mentioned before, like if you have a mirror, and the mirror is completely covered with dirt, you won't see anything at all in it. It's just darkness. But then you start to clean the mirror, and now you start to become aware of all this little light reflected there. And the more you clean it, the clearer the reflection becomes, and till finally a point comes where you see very clearly, oh, this is what's being shown in the mirror, and then you're like, oh, that's it over there. It's not the reflection that we get within our mind, within our experience, but because as we reach a certain point, eventually the understanding comes, oh, it's over there. Now a person who's extremely selfish, who's extremely identified with his own particular kind of small individuality, he's usually not aware of that at all. But as a person goes along with meditation and practice and becoming better and going deeper within, there can come a point when you realize, oh, this is it. And so the scriptures, everything, all the study, classes and things, this is like, as the Zen say, it's like the finger pointing at the moon. You study the scriptures, you get intellectual understanding of what God is and so forth. But it's not the same as God. It's not the same as actually experiencing Brahman. And so, but it's like pointing. So this is in Zen. They say, and this was the foundation of Zen, was that it had become very intellectual. Yeah, they had big universities and everything, and had become very intellectual. But the founder of Zen said that it's not your ideas about God. If you want to know what Buddha is, it's the Buddha consciousness. You have to attain the same consciousness Buddha had, and then you know what he is. Otherwise, but the ideas, the study, the intellectual understanding, this is an important part. Because through that, you get, it's like the study of the map before you take a trip. Through that, you gradually get a clear idea, oh, this is what the goal is, this is how you get there. But then, it comes to the point of actually making the journey. And this then brings you, and then you find that after a certain point, you find that scriptures can't begin, words can't begin to describe what begins to unfold from within. And so then you kind of go beyond that. So all those things like churches, things like that, they have their value of guiding a person, of giving him some of this knowledge and all, but eventually the person begins to make actual contact with the divinity within, and then it's between him and God from that point on.
This verse is very much similar to the one in chapter 13.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, the experiences come and go, and this also in spiritual life, okay, there's a difference between having wonderful spiritual experiences and realization. You can have wonderful visions of God, and all kinds of wonderful things can come through meditation and all, but that's not realization. That's an experience that comes, but the realization is a state of consciousness. It's like, realization means you wake up from the dream that you're something other than God. And then you're totally in a whole different reality. But as you approach that truth, then slowly, then more and more of kind of the glory of God begins to unfold within you. But finally then you realize you're God. And this, Swami Vivekananda explained this in London. They were talking about evolution. And he was talking, he said, well, it's mainly, evolution is mainly spiritual evolution. But he said, what it is that you're not evolving. What it is that Prakriti, or nature, is evolving. And he said, suppose there's a screen between me and you, I can't see anything at all. And now I poke a hole in the screen, and I look through and I see a little bit there. As the hole gets bigger, I'm seeing more and more of the audience, until finally, if the screen is completely removed, then I can see clearly everything that's there. Now, in that process, I didn't change at all. But my experience, nature, the screen, that changed. As this hole got bigger, more and more of the reality began to reveal itself, and my consciousness grew, or my experience grew. But in fact, I was always the same. I was always Brahman. We've always Brahman. Right now, we may be experiencing through a little tiny hole. A person may have a very kind of poor body and mind and not be able to experience much at all. Another person may have a very much vaster mind and intellect and more spiritual development. So for him, the hole's gotten bigger. And he lives in a much vaster state of experience than another person. But in truth, we're all Brahman. The one who's experiencing, the one who's saying, yes, I am experiencing it, I am experiencing ignorance, or I'm experiencing knowledge, the one who's experiencing that is actually always Brahman and always the same. It's just different experiences come. So by itself, we have the ultimate thing is the one Brahman, it never changes, it is never can be affected by anything that happens. If something happens in a movie, it doesn't affect you at all. You experience it, you're aware of it, you see, oh yeah, and maybe you enjoy it, maybe you don't. But it has no effect on you at all. And the same way, this whole universe is going through all the different beings and all the different experiences, but none of that has any effect on Brahman. Now, the more identified we are with the effect, with the experience, then the more that experience, it becomes our reality, and then we become happy or unhappy, depending on the kind of experience we get. And we may go into very terrible moods or states or things where we think we're completely lost, completely miserable and things, but yet, in fact, we're totally all right, because we're always kind of Brahman. We're always just watching the kind of the movie. And so, this is the idea that it's, even if you go to hell, even if you go to the deepest hell, sooner or later you're going to come back out, and in fact, it doesn't affect you at all. And this is why when a person attains realization, when he becomes aware of this divinity within, then immediately he's transformed. He's no longer there, whether he was a good person before or a bad person before. It doesn't make any difference. He's now knows, oh, I'm Brahman. All these dreams have come, and now I'm awake. And so there's no good or bad about it. There's no actual progression or development. It's just either you're asleep or you're awake. When we're in the dream, then we can have good dreams or we can have nightmares. And many people are having like terrible nightmares. But that doesn't truly affect or damage the person in any way. We're always children of God. I remember when I was down in St. Petersburg, Florida, they had the center there. And many long-time devotees for many years are there. Now there's this Swami there, Isha Upanishad. And that center, it was founded by a Reverend Panther. Yeah, he was a disciple of Swami Vivekananda. I think I told you about him before, that he was a disciple of Swami Vivekananda. And he used to be a writer for a very famous radio show back in like the 1930s and all, called The Shadow. He was a Shadow Knows. It was, anyway, and his wife was an actress, I think. So anyway, he spontaneously began to have these experiences of souls, of departed souls, and so he got then involved in the Spiritual Frontiers Church, that's a church that is kind of dedicated to spiritualism. That's their kind of their main thing, and they have seances and things. So he used to do that. He used to have seances at first down in Florida there, and. But after some time, he gave it up. Because he could contact somebody's grandmother and she'd give advice and so forth like that. But he said, all these souls and things, these departed, remember, he said, and he was genuine, he was nothing fake, but he said, they don't know anything. They don't know much more than we do. And so he decided after some time that it's a waste of time, that Vedanta was what really counted. Anyway, when I was there, in St. Petersburg, I talked to one girl. She was partially crippled. I think had crutches thing, and she was saying she had a long-time devotee there, and she was saying that she had been living out in New Mexico, Arizona, and some gang or something attacked their house, and they hurt her physically. I think she was partially crippled, really. And emotionally and everything else, they just really hurt her very, very bad. And then she met Reverend Panther, and he said, he heard her story, the terrible things that had been done to her. And he said, well, you've been hurt very bad physically, and you've been hurt very bad emotionally. He said, but you're still the child of God. And she said, that has stayed with her for the rest of her life. I mean, suddenly, she said, it just cleared everything up. and she found peace, and so she was at the center. But like that's the answer. The ultimate answer to all the problems in the world, to all of our problems, to all of our sufferings and everything, is to become aware that we're the child of God, we're one with God. And as soon as you do that, then the dream goes on, but it doesn't affect you anymore. And this is a realized soul. This is why he can be in the world, but he's not at all affected by it the way other people are, because he knows that behind underlying the appearance, underlying the drama, is the reality. And as Ramakrishna said, that when a person becomes realized, it's like, he said, the magic disappears, but the magician is still there. And so when you realize that, oh, this is actually everything is God, everything I'm God, everything is God, everything is infinite, immortal, nothing can do any harm to anybody, then you realize that basically everything's okay. And you remember when we read accounts from various studies, realized souls or people who had attained some degree of religion, the most common thing, when they also said, was you realize that everything's okay. It's not like you get sunshine and clouds and trumpets and things, but it's just you realize, oh, everything is fine. And, and this is one place Swami Vivekananda said, that everything is perfect already. In this world, you've got very good things going on and you've got very terrible things going on. But underlying it is the perfection of the divinity, and as soon as you become aware of that, then everything is fine. So any other questions?
Swamiji, you just mentioned the last sentence was that Sri Ramakrishna said that when a person becomes a realized soul, magic disappears but the magician stays. Mm-hmm. What is magic in this case? Who is magician?
That's the Brahman. That's the consciousness. The kind of the novelist. That's his consciousness, and that's there. I was the novelist. So I would say he gets totally absorbed in his own story for a while. He gets totally absorbed in that world, but then he kind of wakes up, comes back to himself, and says, "Oh, I'm here." That imaginary world that I was in, that's just kind of imaginary, but this is what I am. Seemingly the soul, which thought it was going through all kinds of problems, that it was getting old and worn out and all kinds of difficulties, that soul wakes up. Amen. Oh, I'm soul, I'm spirit, I'm one with divine consciousness, and then he realizes that divine consciousness, that Brahman, is what's there within.
My second question is, we say many times that Brahman, by whatever name we may call it, is changeless. You just mentioned in the Upanishad also that he is far yet he is near. He is visible yet he is invisible. Mm-hmm. So if he is changeless, we also know that God is evolution, evolution is God. If God is evolving, then this consciousness, Brahman, is also evolving over time.
See, Brahman, it goes back to our example of what Swami Vivekananda said. He said, when you have the screen, what's evolving is the screen, is the hole in the screen. It's getting bigger and bigger and showing more and more. But the consciousness, which is looking through the screen, that's totally unchanged. Again, we use for Shankar's example of the pots with water. A pot may grow, become a bigger pot, but that has no effect at all on the sun being reflected. The sun is only being reflected in that particular instrument, that particular pot, but it hasn't become the pot. It hasn't become the instrument. And the body, or the Brahman, hasn't become anything in the universe. It's always just Brahman. And in the universe, things move all the time. People evolve, people get better, they progress, and like that, go through all kinds of changes within the universe. But that Brahman is not within the universe, but it's his consciousness that's above kind of the universe, containing it.
People who are evolving, not God. When it says it's the people who said that it's the people who are evolving over time, over space, not God.
No.
Why does it say that God is evolution, evolution is God?
Well, you don't. Well, God is evolution in the sense that God is the Hiranyagarbha, as the creative force, as Ishvara, the Lord. He's the force behind evolution. Divine Mother is the force behind evolution, but God is something different. Like we said, the teacher, he teaches, but that's just a part, that's a function. The job he does, an activity he does, but in his own nature, the teacher is just himself. He's just a human being, and like I said, he's sitting home not teaching at all, and watching TV. In the same way we said Brahman is God in his own essence, and this is one tiny drop, one tiny bit of himself. He creates this whole universe, this whole universe, like a little drop in the ocean of Brahman. So he creates that within that universe. Evolution, things are going on, and he's the power behind it all. He's kind of the push behind everything that's happening. Just as the writer, everything that's happening in his story is coming out of his mind and being projected there. But yet at the same time, Brahman is actually not changed by any of that, not transformed by anything that happens. And in fact, we're not transformed by anything that happens. If you have a dream, you experience that dream. But when you wake up, you know, oh, it was just a dream. I'm here. This is what I am. This is what I've always been. And for how I dreamed that I was a cow or something. But now I know that, okay, this is me. And the same way Brahman is always Brahman. As when we get under the spell of ignorance, we think, oh, I'm a person, I'm this or that. But actually, we're always just Brahman.
One more question, third question. When we understand, try to understand, comprehend God with attributes and God without attributes, when people, including myself, when I read and study God with attributes, His glories, it gives me a lot of happiness. When I study God in complete abstraction, without attributes, it becomes boring. Why is the case?
Well, that's because, and that is, see, God is with attributes. Sadhana Brahman is God. The different gods, another Rama, Krishna, all these are manifestations, expressions of God, and it's much easier for us as human beings to relate to it and be inspired. If we think of Holy Mother, or we think of Ramakrishna, or Rama, or Krishna, it's much easier for us to be inspired by that. The abstract God, Brahman, like I said, for most people, they have no idea what it is. It's just an abstraction, and it's boring for most people. When you actually begin to experience that divine reality, that's a different story. Now you've got something, now you know, oh, this is something really wonderful. And so, God can come in the form of, say, Rama or Krishna, and it can be a very wonderful experience. But also then, at times, the form may disappear, and you realize this is an expression of that underlying consciousness. And, this was when Swami Seshananda, one of the first talks I heard in Chicago when I first came, Swami Seshananda, Holy Mother's disciple, was there, and somebody asked him, does God have form, or doesn't God have form? And he said, well, sometimes God has form, sometimes He doesn't. And when you actually begin to experience God, you can experience Him with form, but also sometimes you'll experience Him without form. And really, it's the same thing. So Swami Vivekananda said, that I tend to be very philosophical, thinking, I'm Brahman, but he said, but when I have a stomach ache, then I call, Mother, help me. So I tend, we're human beings. As human beings, it's much easier for us to connect with God in some sort of human term. But that human connection evolves, it grows. Well, once it becomes a genuine connection, then it evolves and it grows, and you realize that God's with form and He's God form. And eventually, you realize that God isn't just in the form of Rama or Krishna, that He's in all forms. And then you realize everything you're seeing, the wonderful Krishna, the wonderful Rama Krishna that I experienced, I'm seeing him also here in all these forms. Then you realize kind of what a wonderful thing it is. So both aspects are there: transcendent, pure spiritual aspect, and the human aspect. And Swami Varadananda said that for human beings, it's much easier to think of God, to relate to God in human terms. And Swami Vivekananda said that if we were cows, we'd have to think of God as a great big cow, because that's kind of our nature. It's only when you go really deeper into things, then you can begin to appreciate the impersonal kind of aspect. Okay. So anything else? Any other questions? Then Swami Isha Upanishad, he's in Providence right now, Swami Yogananda, but he'll be back in time for class on Sunday and be on his why we should meditate. And then we have Swami Vivekananda, who is a trustee of Ramakrishna Mission and also the head of the Sharapit. He's coming in March, and he's going to do a retreat at Ganges from March 16th to the 18th. And he's going to...
Is it month of May?
May.
May.
Oh, that's which month did it say? Yeah, anyway, in May. And he will then, and he also do a fundraising dinner here, and on Sunday evening, which we'll hold over at the Hindu temple. And I'm pretty sure he took sannyas with me, and he was in too. He was like the natural leader of the group. Very kind of strong personality, and now he's head of Sharapit, so he's just a natural and really fine person, very, very nice person. And so he is coming, I think. And that'll be in May. Now May, anything else coming in May? I don't know, don't think so.
Just around now.
Oh, yeah, just around now on the second Saturday, I think 10th of May. Om Asato Ma Sagyamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mridunam Amritam Gavaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light, and lead us from death to immortality. Oh, peace, peace, peace.